Hello. Welcome to this experiment for my first ever live stream, but also my first open conversation. I've seen lots of people do this online, particularly in this little corner. So I figured, hey, why not give it a try? There's a lot of things about this format that make me a little uncomfortable. So I don't know if I'll keep doing it, but I figured it was a fun thing to play around with and see if it was helpful. So if you'd like to join the conversation, I've got a little link below. Otherwise, I don't know. It's just me. um, yeah. So I'm gonna give it some time to see if anybody joins, and then if not, I don't know. I'll probably just start processing some of the things I'm thinking. Um, but yeah, I'll give it some time. I'm so uncomfortable with the dead air. I'm not used to it. I know that watching some of these, I've seen a lot of people just sit and wait for people to come on, and I they have so much more patience than I do. I'm not used to. It's not usually the appropriate thing to do when you go live, but hey, we're all about shifting the mode of these things, I suppose. But I guess for now, I kind of will just talk about some of the things that have been going on. Maybe it'll spark some conversation, get people interested in coming in. Yeah, it's been a crazy year. I think the last couple months, it's been a lot of downtime for me to process a lot of things. And I found myself in this place where I've been consuming a lot. And yeah, there's a lot of good and bad that comes from all of that. um, but I think for myself, I'm trying to kind of battle this idea of what is good consumption and bad consumption, and how do I process well within that space. And part of starting this whole thing up again is figuring out, well, how do I put out things and create to help me stop the cycle of consumption? Because that's always been something very helpful for myself. Because I do have a tendency, as many people do, I think, on the internet who spend a lot of time uh, watching videos or consuming media, like you get in these YouTube spirals or these holes. And I think being a filmmaker, there's a lot of this place where I'm even more prone to media because there's a part of it that you justify it being some sort of uh, professional research, or that's a joke, anyways, where you can justify watching things or getting into cycles to be inspired by the things that other people have created. There's a huge part of that that's really important, but yeah, there's the place where it goes too far, and so the ways I've always escaped that is creating. But there's so much complications in what it looks like to create and have that be something that's healthy, something that's good. There's a lot of ethics that comes into creating, and I think especially in the last year, it's really hit me in the process of sort of what that means for myself. Like, and being really intentional about the stories I'm telling and what I'm trying to say with what I'm creating. Um, and it's, I don't know if the state in which I'm doing it is completely healthy, but it's that kind of process that you have to go through where there's at least a piece of it that's somewhat important and somewhat helpful, but it can be really debilitating in the same way where if you get too caught up into that cycle of trying to be conscious of what you're creating and putting out and making sure it's exactly what you mean and what you say, it holds you off from being able to throw yourself into the process of creating in general. And you get too scared to ever put something out into the world without it being perfect or pretty. So it's that hard balance that I'm fighting through. And I think after 10 years of different types of creation and different forms of it, yeah, it becomes even more important because I'm past the point where I can really just throw things out in the fullest sense and it feel like it doesn't fully matter. You just been in the process long enough that there's something about walking the path that makes you feel like you want to progress, right? You want to go back to square one, but there's also this like dichotomy in me that's being willing to embrace the messiness of square one that square one brought me, where I would create for the sake of creating and be willing to put things out into the world without it being perfect or at the highest quality that it could be. And yeah, I don't really know how to manage that well, especially because of how impactful the things you put out into the world can be. I think if you spend too much time creating and it's in your own bubble and you never let anybody in, that can be just as a bit debilitating as throwing something out into the world for everybody to see, and it creates a similar anxiety within yourself of figuring out what to create. Oh yes, we have someone to talk with. Thank you so much, Sam, for coming on.
You're welcome, Cassidy. Thanks for hosting this. Oh, I gotta mute the YouTube video. I'm hearing you and myself twice. How are you doing?
Oh, good. Been busy. How are you?
Pretty good. How's married life treating you?
Oh, well, it's pretty good so far, but it's only been 3 months, so I don't know if I can be
Well,
the
good. Enjoy that period. It's called the honeymoon period for a reason.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been fun, and I finally got my visa officially,
Oh,
so
congratulations.
thank you. So that adds a certain level of security where it's like, okay, I don't have to travel between countries every 3 months.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, my sister lives in Germany, so I at least know a little bit about European visa stuff from hearing her talk about it.
Yeah, she married a German?
No,
Okay.
she was dating a German, but that is no longer true.
Oh, okay.
But she's still in Berlin. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I could have gotten the visa before we actually officially married. It just didn't process before that, but it's just so funny because I don't think that would be true in America.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to be married and
Right.
there's a whole bigger process. So I'm glad it wasn't
Do
a
they
whole
interview
nightmare.
you to make sure you're like really married and stuff? Because I know that America does like this extra step of like, all right, this isn't just some sort of like arrangement where you're pretending to be married for 6 months to get your green card and then you get divorced and that was some sort of immigration scam or something like that.
No, it was a lot easier. I mean, we had to prove that we were in a relationship. So you had to prove that you had been with each other or like in each other's presence for like at least 2 times or 3 times, and then you had to prove that you had some sort of relationship. So we had to send like text messages and Discord chats and things to prove that we had a relationship. And then there was other certain things that they had to prove, like that your partner had enough funds to like support you if you didn't have a job or anything. And I can work now that I have a visa, but that was sort of the thing, so you don't end up on government pay.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I mean, Ferdy did a lot of it, so I'm not totally
That's
sure
helpful. Yeah.
all of the process, but yeah, we definitely had to submit lots of proof to show that we were in a relationship, but it was not. It doesn't seem it was to the extreme that America is.
Yeah, yeah, because I know that there's like mail order brides and that sort of thing who, will try and scam their way into the country and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I don't know if Faraday and I will go to the U.S. I mean, it's definitely in the cards potentially, but it's hard to know what that future looks like super far down the line.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm interested to see how different the process is if we take that step and try to get him to have a visa or some sort of other green card, if it's going to be harder. I imagine it will be. It seems like, I don't know, do people just want to move to Europe less than America? I don't know.
I think on the whole, I saw some survey recently that was like, of people living all over the world, what's your number one country that you would want to move to if you could? And it's like always the US, I think, by a mile. I think the United States sometimes underestimates its own desirability. And we assume that we have all these problems and, oh, look at the healthcare system in Sweden. Surely you would rather move there or, what have you. And, but the US has some magnetic attraction that I don't think we even fully understand about ourselves.
Yeah, well, when I was living in Australia, I was always surprised how much US politics ended up on the news. Well, and I was living there during the Trump election, so that was just extra chaos.
Yes.
But even the way that they saw our culture, like Australians love American films and movies. And so there was this glamorization of America and they loved it. And that was just surprising to me.
Even during Trump election, they still love
well,
it. Yeah.
It got a little dicey, but it depends on who you talk to.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. So are you involved at all in the California festival that's being planned? I think Van Donk is hosting Peugeot and Vervaeke and Paul again sometime this spring, I think in Sacramento.
Yeah, no, I don't. It's definitely not me. I think Paul is probably, if it's in Sacramento, I think him and his church are probably handling most of the organization of that. But I'm not sure. But yeah, me and Matthias just had a talk today about the next festival, which will likely be in Germany. And then, we're I think I'm stuck in the European sphere.
Yeah.
At least for the long term, which.
Would you be willing to provide any support for planning for American events?
Oh yeah, I love doing it. It's some of my favorite things. It really comes down to just the ability to do that. We got another person coming to the stream. Oh, I'm gonna mute you, Kentrell, because you got some music playing. So. All right. I just think he's playing music. You can message me if you have more than music to add.
Might have just been a troll. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. The private chat seems to be somewhat trollish. What was I saying? Oh yeah, a lot of it just comes down to the space that I have and the ability to help. But a lot of the planning and the sort of front end stuff, it's very easy to do from anywhere. Up until like very close to the event where things get a little tricky. But as long as you have somebody in that place, like there's a lot that you can do with support and all of those things.
Yeah.
Okay, we got another. More trolls.
From now on, we need to know you.
Yeah, that sounds like a good rule.
Jess, if it's you're
Jess, you can come on. But see, this is part of the just chatting thing that always makes me anxious. It's like, what is like you have no control.
We're the raw internet. We have no control. I've been thinking about, you know, what sort of, like, this is a topic I am perennially thinking about, is what sort of organization should this little corner have? And I'm always sort of probably tempted in the direction of trying to over engineer or over organize it. And I think that Paul often pushes back on that. And I think he's mostly been proven right in many of his resistance to do anything too formal. But I do think that one thing that could be useful is some more centralized help for planning events, because planning events is difficult.
Right.
And even a little risky. And that I feel like we like events. And right now we're sort of mostly, British often thought that they would like to live in US even if they know nothing about it. Maybe not so much these days, though. Interesting. What was I saying? That it would be helpful to have some more central organization around event planning, because right now it's sort of like do it yourself, right? Like Chicago has done something, Thunder Bay has done something, Sacramento's now doing something, you guys did something. And, you know, it's a fair amount of work, especially to do it completely from scratch. And if we're going to do bigger events, which have larger budgets and or attract even more prominent people than just sort of like Vervaeke and Pajot, even though, you know, I love Vervaeke and
How dare
Pajot, it would be helpful to have some sort of like brand that we could point to that has some past success and track record, right?
Yeah.
As well as handling money and legal stuff and that sort of not particularly fun business.
Right. Well, and I think that's where the German festival has been interesting, because we definitely experienced a lot of curveballs in the last week that I think if you had no experience in festivals or events or had no idea of how to prepare for that, could be really overwhelming and daunting and just take someone down and take the fun out of all of it. And so I think having a way to find that support and give people support with that, I think that would be really helpful. And one of the reasons I've always been sort of on the forefront of, hey, let's talk about, or like, let's plan events and do those things, because I've been in that world for at least the last 4 or 5 years. And I think there's a lot of space for it. I mean, we've had lots of private conversations about this, of the way that it could help and grow things more naturally and give support for local communities. So, all right, we've got another third party. I'm going to add them to the stream, but it might just be more music. But yeah. So I don't know. I mean, what's your thoughts? You've done the most consistent events two in a row.
We've only done one.
Really. Oh, okay.
I don't.
1.5.
1.5. Yeah. And like our event, our big event, I think had a total budget of between $2,000 and $3,000, right? Which is enough where I can be the financer and I can pay Portillo's. The biggest snafu we had is that Portillo's forgot to bring the beef broth for the Italian beef for our lunch. And so I had to call them and be like, hey, where's our beef broth? And like, oh shoot, we forgot it. And so they had to come back and bring it. That was the biggest snafu that we had. You guys had much bigger hiccups than we did. But other than that, you know, people bought their own plane tickets and paid for their own hotels and that sort of thing. I have a dream for an event, but I think it would take us a while. I don't think it could happen in 2023. I think in 2024 at the earliest. And even then, that might not be the best. It still might not be ready by then. Yeah. But there's a semi-abandoned monastery in the Chicago suburbs that it's like, you know, there was one of those mission orders of the Catholic Church that's slowly dying out, and basically everyone left in the order is 80 or 90 years old. So this monastery is basically turned into a retirement home for people who used to do missions in this. It's the Order of the Divine Word or something like that, which is cool because that means it's the order of the Logos, which is symbolically resonant. But they have a lot of empty rooms at this monastery. And so I think it would be really fun to have an event where people just, stay at the monastery. And then we have a bunch of speakers and stuff like that. And it would be, titled something about the meaning crisis, because what's more meaning crisisy than an abandoned monastery?
Right. I mean, I think there's so much potential for it. And I think there's something good about starting small and growing into it. I think it's easy to be like, oh, we can take on the world and do all these things. But every little conference we do, every time someone takes a step out to make something happen in person, it teaches us something. And through the group collective, we learn from each other and figure out how to do it. But yeah, I would love to see like the process of how we can make those things happen. Not just because they're fun, but I think they do create the space where you're grounding much more in the local communities and creating spaces to make local estuaries. I'm sure you found it helpful for your own estuary to put on that event and do those things.
We picked up exactly one person in our meetup group from the live event who didn't know about our meetup and then now is a regular attender. One person.
Well, that's still good though. I mean, how many
Yeah.
did you have before?
We have between like 8 and 12 very regular attenders, I would say. It's interesting. Our estuary / meetup group hasn't been growing very much for a while, but we have a very committed core of people who show up basically every time. And we don't have very many new people anymore. We used to have in the beginning, there was a few new people each time. And that isn't now. Every once in a while we have a new person, but it is struggling to grow, but it's not dying, so we have a perfectly viable group of people. And it's funny, we don't really do the estuary protocol because once you're at your like 20th meeting with the same people that you recognize, you don't need to go around and do introductions. And like going around and having everybody propose what they want to talk about and then voting on it seems a little tedious,
Too structured in a certain way where like
Yes.
you guys understand the game you're playing, and so you can
Right.
play
We can
a little
just kind
looser.
of normally Hank just starts talking about something and then we go from there.
Yeah.
But,
No, but it's interesting to see what the German festival did, because there was a lot of international communities. So you already see there's, talk about the Dutch participation and how they can create space to meet more in person. And then you've got the continued growth of the German community and the way that they keep participating. And I love what Matthias has done with the German community. They really have found ways to not just sit around and talk, but like ground and connect with each other and let that be a part of what they do. And then
like what?
Like they have campfires. They went like caroling at one point. They have all these different events. And I mean, even before we did the official festival, they were sort of the ones who got the get-togethers. They did a trip in Germany before the year before the festival. That was, I think they just went hiking and went to restaurants, and it was very unstructured, but, creating that space is to have those opportunities. And so that's just exciting, because as much as I love the online participation part of this, and it's definitely been a net positive.
What's the age breakdown of the German group?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Is it a lot of young single people?
Yeah, I think mostly young single men, although there are some people older and married, but I think it's mostly young single men.
That's interesting, because another interesting thing about our Chicago group, which is wonderful, but we have, I think, people from every decade from 20 through 80.
Oh, that's amazing.
And most of the people are married, and even, some of them are retired. And so it changes, what sort of activities a group like that would be interested in doing or have free time to do.
Yeah. I mean, I went to the festival, I was pretty much the only woman there. I mean, Sarah came at one point, but it was a lot of men, probably mid to late 20s and into their 30s, but we had some people who were older.
Mhm.
And I mean, maybe that's just a demographic of who can take the time to spend 3 days out of the weekend and
Yeah.
leave and participate in something like that.
Yeah.
It definitely shifts the demographic, but I mean, I think there's always going to be something about the estuary movement where there's a lot of young men.
Yeah. And it's a question of sometimes, and I saw you and Van Donk talked about this a little bit. Sometimes should it be appropriate to be like, this actually just is for men, right? As opposed to this just happens to naturally be predominantly male.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question to be asked. Like, I'm not against an all man, organization. If you want to make estuary all men, okay. I mean, I would not like to see that because I want to participate in it and have been participating in it. But there's the value to it, and I see it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that hard question where it's like there is the double-edged sword to the diversity. Diversity does open you up to ideas and different thoughts, and men and women just think differently in a lot of ways, in a lot of terms, and they can look at questions differently, but it makes things more complicated in the same breath. And so I think things will have to form and shape and see how they go. But I like the idea of the estuary being more open in the sense that local groups can make their own sort of definers of what is best for that community and that group who are meeting versus it being a hard rule for every estuary. Because it wasn't an estuary group. It was like a Jordan Peterson meetup group, but it was similar in style to estuary. There's far more women at that than I would say there are in a typical estuary setting.
Well, what's interesting, the Chicago group still kind of blurs the line between estuary and Jordan Peterson meetup. And for last month, this month, and the next month, I'm specifically advertising our meeting as a discussion of Jordan Peterson's Exodus series, right? And on meetup.com. And like, we've all agreed that that's kind of what we want to talk about. So we'll like watch a half hour of it and then talk about it afterwards. So we're still and because that's what we started as, right? And so we're still, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder, are we a Jordan Peterson meetup or are we an estuary or a little bit of both?
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of a bit of a gray line where it's somewhere in the middle of both. I think a lot of people who brought to the estuary movement entered through Peterson. I was not one of them. Although I found Peterson interesting to a point, but I definitely don't have the background and history of watching Peterson the way many people who do participate in this little corner do. So it's hard to know how much to rely on that versus expanding it to something deeper, because you spend long enough in the estuary space. We're not just talking about Peterson. He comes up quite a lot, but there's a lot more that goes on. But it's a really easy way to start the conversation and point things and create space to bring people in.
Yeah, and he seems to be an attractor for the sort of right type of person. I don't know.
Yeah, what does that mean to you, the right type of person?
I don't know. How would you possibly describe what it is that holds a lot of the people in this corner of the internet together in common? I don't know exactly what that is. It's kind of one of those things that you can see it when you can recognize it when you see it, but it's hard to propositionalize because it's not just like, I don't know, being interested in religion, because that clearly there's a lot of people interested in religion who aren't this. And
right.
So it's very, I really don't know exactly how to describe it, but interest in Jordan Peterson seems to be the strongest variable that I can think of that predicts it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something about the way Peterson communicates that draws a different type of approach to the conversation. Like the first thing I ever watched of Peterson was the Kathy Newman interview, right? And that's for a lot of people the first thing that they saw, although he was pretty prominent in a certain sense before that with the biblical series and all those things. But what was interesting about that conversation, he was able to stand up for and defend himself without punching back in a way that felt like he was starting a war. He kind of kept his cool, he kept his calm, and he didn't try to minimize the person who was attacking him. And that was really interesting because since before that, that's not really what you were seeing. It was like, the person destroyed by facts and logic or what have you. Yeah. And that was sort of my interest in him. And I mean, he's gone through different phases as he's gotten more popular of like the way he approaches things. And in a lot of ways, it's understandable when you have that much criticism coming at you and that much popularity and eyes on you. You never quite know how to respond to it or answer it. And I think that ability to hold off that frustration and the ability to think that could work and be helpful long term could easily, be limited, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But I mean, I think for me, a lot of what I look at in this corner of the internet, it's not really ideology that brings us all together because there's ideologies from all across the map. And, interest in religion is something, but there's this spirit in the way we approach the conversations that feels quite different.
Yeah.
And I think I'm still trying to find the words of how to describe it or like.
Did you watch Jordan B. Cooper talk with Vervaeke on Paul's channel yesterday? That was Paul's video from yesterday.
No.
So Jordan B. Cooper is this sort of Lutheran apologist and internet kind of explainer, answer man guy, public theologian, apologist kind of guy. And he's more of the more of like Christian YouTube, right? Where it's like he's telling you the truth and that attracts the audience that's interested in hearing it, right? And he's trying to make classical Lutheranism and classical Protestantism seem more attractive to young people. And he's like, I kind of get why people are interested in Eastern Orthodoxy, but I actually think for a lot of the reasons that they're interested, Lutheranism would be a better fit, right? And he goes through philosophers and theologians and stuff and explains them, right? Luke, this is live. I can see you. This is real live.
Luke, if you want to join, there's a link in the Discord and the.
But if you're just going to play rap music, Luke, we're going
to. We'll bump you.
And so what's interesting is that Vervaeke had made a video about Martin Luther for his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, which I would say was not particularly flattering of Martin Luther. And then Jordan B. Cooper made sort of a response, right? Because he's a Lutheran, so he's got to defend the credibility of Luther out there on the internet. Right. And so then they made a couple of back and forth response videos to each other. And then Paul hosted them for a discussion. And they spent approximately 5% of the time talking about Martin Luther, even though all of the prep was like, Martin Luther is this. No, he isn't. He's this. No, he isn't. He's this. Right. And then they get to, face to face with each other and they can barely be mean.
Yeah.
Vervaeke's a little bit too agreeable or too. He really believes in dialogos and stuff like that. So he's not going to be too combative in a conversation. And Jordan B. Cooper, I think, was a little bit, he knows that Vervaeke is higher than him in the hierarchy and like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it was funny. Like I could tell that Jordan B. Cooper is not quite yet the sort of person who is like really a good fit for this corner of the internet. He's still a little bit too propositional, a little bit too, here's my tribe. I got to make my tribe look good and I got to defend and explain my tribe and attract people to my tribe, right? Which is, not quite a good fit. but
Yeah.
he's starting to ask some of the questions, and he can have a conversation with Vervaeke. So like for him, when I'm thinking about what makes someone a good fit for this corner of the internet, it's interesting thinking about why Jordan B. Cooper kind of is and kind of isn't, right?
Yeah.
And so Luke says 100% Sam. I'm not sure what he was agreeing with, but
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something too about the conversation, like the way you approach it. Is it in this frame of exploration, or are we, in the battle of ideas frame? Because
right.
you're going to approach and communicate with someone in that in a conversation very differently depending on what frame you're coming from. And I think there is a mode for both. I'm not the anti, apologetics debate thing. It certainly has its place. I learned a lot from that. But I just find it a lot more helpful when you're opening up to the exploration part. I think particularly if you're really trying to find good answers to questions, like certainly asking those hard questions and debating through ideas and steel manning ideas is helpful in coming to an understanding of what might be true and how to hold a true belief in a rational propositional way. But there's something much more to it than just the rationality of like, well, how does it affect the way we see in the human experience? And how do our feelings and the processes of those things affect the way that we act it out in our lives? And like if you just try to isolate one too much without taking the place of or giving at least space to explore those things, I think it makes it much more what's the word? It makes it harder for you to like ask those questions well, at least for me. Like when I was in the apologetics world trying to ask those questions and listening to a lot of the debates, was learning a lot. I was getting better understandings of what I believed and why, and dropping like out different ideas or that I thought were not healthy from what I was given. Yet there was still this sort of so much fear and so much anxiety and skepticism that went into it all. And when I kind of stepped back and took a more exploratory view of it, it became easier to walk the path, even when it was difficult in the face of uncertainties.
I think that you're right that openness for exploration is important as a marker of what makes someone a good fit for this. And it's like, okay, so you're a Martin Luther scholar. That doesn't necessarily exclude you from being able to participate in that kind of way, right? But if you're not open to learning from people who are pretty different from you because you're scared that might change you away from what you are, then that's not going to work very well. And it's a little bit difficult and complicated for clergymen. And this is why Paul is an interesting person, right? Because, well, I mean, another thing about Paul is like, how much does anyone actually ever change Paul Vanderklay, right? Because he's one of those people who's like so open and has so many potential sources of influence that any single potential source of influence isn't going to play a very big role. Like, this is one thing I've noticed about, like, sometimes closed-minded people have a small number of people that they really trust. And then most people they don't trust at all to change their minds or to inform them about the proper opinion on a new topic, right? Whether it's vaccines or masks or, like, because even closed-minded people need to update their system because the world's changing, right? And they need official opinions on new questions. And what I've noticed is that closed-minded people, in a certain sense, it's almost impossible to change their mind if you're outside their network of trust. But if you're inside their network of trust, it's very, very easy to change their mind because they trust their couple authority figures so much. Right. But highly open-minded people are sort of the opposite. It's easy to become one of the sort of people who might have a little influence on them. But it's very hard to become the sort of person who has a lot of influence on them because no one has a lot of influence on them because they have so many influences, right? And so it's sort of like this weird, who's easier to change the mind of, a closed-minded person or an open-minded person? well, it depends what sort of trust you have with them, I think is sort of the answer.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I really haven't thought about it that way. I mean, I've certainly thought about the ways in which relationships affect how well we listen to people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think it's more than just trust. I think it's respect. Like if you respect somebody and they say something that you find to be odd and outside of like the realm of something normally true that you would believe. I think if you respect that person, despite how much personal relationship or trust you have with them, it at least opens your mind to listen to them more than someone you don't really respect very much.
Yeah.
And then, you know, that respect can be gained or lost depending on, you know, how you participate with them. And I think, I don't know, how do you feel respect comes into that frame of an open-minded person versus a closed-minded person?
That's a good point, because respect might be a better word than trust. Like imagine some grumpy conservative uncle whose opinions basically 100% line up with Tucker Carlson, right? And he watches Tucker Carlson every night. And basically every time he's an espousing opinion about political topics, it's basically a repeat of Tucker Carlson, right? It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to ever be able to change his mind on any topic, except Tucker Carlson can change his mind on any topic, right? and, like, you know, he might be skeptical of the war in Russia, whereas 10 years ago, that grumpy uncle would have hated Russia, right? You know, so like, but yet Tucker Carlson can, you know, navigate him to new intellectual horizons, but he doesn't maybe notice his own change, or he has so much respect for Tucker Carlson that, you know, his opinions are basically just a repeat of that. So, but how does Tucker Carlson get to be Tucker Carlson? I mean, obviously he has a news show on Fox, but how did he get that, right? And why is his audience bigger than Sean Hannity or any of the other Fox personalities who would compete for that? Presumably there was something about Tucker Carlson that was good at earning the trust and respect of people like your grumpy conservative uncle. So, you know, how exactly that works, I don't know.
Well, and like, I think, oh, Luke's coming in. I mean, I think you look now like at the Daily Wire, like what was it about Ben Shapiro that got the trust of so many young people, and continues to grow? I mean, that one's somewhat complicated, but there's an interest in that movement as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The point I want to bring in, and I can't say because I'm vacuuming, which is so much fun. Also playing World of Warcraft all day. Just kidding.
That was from the video this morning.
Yeah.
Stay-at-home dads, all they want to do is play World of Warcraft and drink beer.
Inside joke. But I guess I would propose that someone who trusts Tucker Carlson or Ben Shapiro or fill in the blank of whatever kind of prominent high status thought leader you want to put up there, I don't think they actually trust them. I think that's ego. I think that's all ego rooted in fear and intellectual tribalism. And I would actually say that I think a lot of those people probably don't have much of a good idea of what they actually think about things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that would be my major point, because, and I would root that in my assertion that all knowledge is personal, and they don't know Tucker Carlson. They don't know him at all. I mean, that's culture war, identitarian stuff that's rooted in fear. I would say that has zero to do with what they believe, probably, most likely.
Well, I think there's
but what if they have a gun? You know, right? Like, and they're acting out some of that worldview, right? They're not signing up to fight for Russia against Ukraine, but, you know, they're embodying some amount of something. They probably drive a sort of car that would probably identify them as a conservative person, with both the kind of car it is and the bumper stickers on it. Right. And there are some amount of embodied something, but I also do. over time, the more I interact with you, the more I realize you've been right this whole time. Not always, but sometimes.
Oh, Sam! I
I
love
also
you too.
know how to push your buttons, but
You do. I agree with you to some degree, but that I would say that's more of like my general frame of true self, false self, because I would say that who you really are is not rooted in the embodiment of things that come out of hate or fear. That's the anti
well,
you.
why not? Because people hate, people fear. Well, how is that not you?
It's misaligned love. It's ignorant love. I think that's what hate is.
We fear things for a reason. Fear has a purpose.
Yeah,
Even hate has a purpose.
yeah. I mean, I'm not like saying it shouldn't exist or that it's not also forming us, but I say weird things like Christ plays an antichrist.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, I don't want to listen. If I stay, I will just derail the whole conversation and just spout Lukeisms all day, and I got to go back to work. I like both you guys. I'm happy to see this. This is fun.
So Luke, what did you think of the Cooper Vervaeke conversation?
So when I said 100%, I agree with you. I was doing that very loud. So it's exactly what you said when I said that. I think that Cooper is, I loved at the end when Vervaeke, I was half annoyed again and half happy that Vervaeke extended that olive
Welcome.
branch or gesture or welcome to him because on one hand, this is the kind of community that I think teaches people how to actually have real dialogos and learn how to think and engage with people and learn to love people that don't just share in all your ideas and self-identities. And so on that hand, it's great, but here's the thing, as long as he's going to tie himself, it's that Sinclair Ferguson quote that I love, that it's hard to get a man to see something if his salary depends upon him not seeing it. If you tie all your status and your job and your income to institutions that are rooted in self-identity around ideas, you can't play in this field.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not going to happen.
So how's Paul able to do that? Because Paul's a pastor at a denomination that has confessions, etc.
Yeah, I put that in the comments of why I said I gave like 3 reasons of why I think Paul can do that.
Because, you did do that. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's not doing it institutionally, and because he doesn't have that. I mean, he's gotten bigger, and he also was fairly prominent, but it's a minor dying church denomination. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. PBK, and he's not inclined to play status games. PBK was raised and grew up in the neighborhoods and communities that he did. All of that allows PBK to do what he's doing. There's a reason he's an anomaly.
Right. He also has, because of his name and his family prestige and stuff like that, his identity is so secure and unimpeachable that it gives him a certain kind of security that Jordan B. Cooper, who I feel like is still making a name and a place for himself, right? And doesn't have the security that Paul Vanderklay has late in his career. That Cooper doesn't feel as free on some of those things.
Yeah, I think that's true too, for sure.
Yeah.
So Luke, do you think if Paul had a bigger, more prominent church, he wouldn't be able to do the kind of things he does online?
I think he would be much less inclined. I don't know if I kind of said it was the fullness of time, a little bit of what allowed Paul to do that. Part of it's his temperament, part of it's his church, part of it's his phase of life. I think that's another good point. It's the whole, like, what you see and hear depends a lot upon where you're standing and the kind of person you are. If Paul had a bigger church and status, and like that quote that I just read out about your ego being tied up or your income being tied up in playing those games, he wouldn't have seen and heard the stuff that he saw and heard that built this community.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think. But I'm glad he did.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to listen to you guys now. Love you.
Bye, Luke. Thanks for joining.
But also, I mean, the Orthodox folks, whether it's Peugeot or whoever, I mean, they have creeds and confessions too. And Peugeot seems to have some freedom, but not a lot of freedom on some. So, like, for example, I don't need to make everything about me, but I can make some things about me. Peugeot and Cooper have one thing in common, and that it's that they don't respond to my emails. And I don't mean to just be bitter, because a lot of people don't, and some people do, right? And I think that Peugeot and Cooper are scared to talk to me about the Trinity, because that starts to mess with their institutional binding in a way that other subjects don't. Peugeot can talk to Vervaeke about angels / metacognition and stuff like that, right? Till the cows come home. And that is not, his priest isn't going to knock on his door after a conversation about that and be like, hey, Peugeot, I heard that you said this, this, and this about the possible existence of angels, right? But if he made the wrong noises on the subject of the Trinity, that could be a different conversation with a priest or a bishop, and ditto for Cooper. And so I've never been able to get either of them to talk to me on that subject. And I do think it's because that I'm poking at the thing that Luke was talking about of testing their institutional allegiance or boundary markers.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's interesting. It's probably to the level in which Peugeot is at, because there's a certain space where, yeah, the Orthodox have their creeds. We have our, specific doctrines. Yeah, when I was going into Orthodoxy, they're very open to me exploring different things. They're very patient in the faith, right? The church is always here. If you want to be a part of the church, we will help you come in. But if you feel like you need to search elsewhere, go for it, which I never felt the same in a Protestant church. The Protestant church is like, come, we'll tell you what we believe. And then there's just that hope that eventually you'll be brought in. But if you don't find that lining, it
don't
becomes...
you think that the Orthodox are hoping for the same thing? Maybe just more patiently?
Possibly. Like, I don't think it's wrong that they and I don't think the evangelical thing is wrong inherently, where wanting to help people, especially if that thing has helped you. And I was part of evangelical churches for a long time, but there was something a little more patient about the way they did it. And, when I said, hey, I'm scheduled to be a catechumen, but, or get chrismated, but I'm going to go to some Jewish services and just explore that. They're like, great, go ahead. Which I don't know if I would have gotten the same sense. Like, even when I said, hey, I'm going to start exploring Orthodoxy, my Protestant church I was at, I was like, are you sure? There wasn't that much trust in people. But again, I think it might be different. Peugeot does sort of put himself in a place where he talks very authoritatively about Orthodoxy.
Yeah,
so
yeah. He's different than just a random like you just being a congregant, right? Or at a different level of authority than, although Peugeot doesn't have any actual title, but he has this weird informal authority where many people look to him as a source for orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And so that's why a conversation around certain theological subjects is very difficult for him. Michael Satori asks, have you sent as many letters as Michael Cervea sent to John Calvin? I sent 3 emails. This is my personal rule. When I am trying to get people to come on my channel, sometimes it takes some persistence. People don't always respond to the first email, or they semi-respond and you have to badger them a little bit. And that, I've sort of worked out a protocol of how to get people to come on my YouTube channel. That's one of the skills that a podcast or a YouTube channel host needs to develop, is getting people to come on their channel. And so if I'll do 3 emails and no response after 3 emails, then I'm done. So hopefully that answers your question, Michael Sartori. I'll just say I've hit my limit with both Peugeot and Jordan B. Cooper. So I don't think that I will be badgering them unless someone else introduces me or something.
I mean, as a Unitarian, have you seen a lot of pushback to people talking to you, or is it mostly just been sort of ignoring? Or have there been people who have been very straightforward, they're not going to talk to you?
I think it's mostly ignoring, and then I have to surmise the motivation for that, right? Because I know that Peugeot. I mean, I've met Peugeot face to face, and I know he knows who I am, vaguely speaking, and so that makes me do an extra level of wondering. And I thought at first, I thought Jordan B. Cooper, he gets a lot of emails and I had the wrong email account or something like that. But then when Paul brought me up, he knew who I was. So I'm like, okay, so you did read those emails. You just didn't reply. Interesting. Right. And then so I'm like trying to, okay, so what's going through his head that he reads my emails? He knows who I am off the top of his head when Paul brings me up, but yet he won't reply. And I don't mean to be too personal about them too, but there are a lot of other people that are like that where, okay, so I email an important professor somewhere. Okay. They don't respond, right? Is that because of my theology? Is that because they're busy? Is that because they don't know who I am? Right. Whatever. I don't often get the response of, I don't want to talk to you because you're a heretic, but sometimes I do. It does take a couple emails to sort of win over someone's trust. I can tell. And I know, and sometimes it's even somewhat explicit that that's part of the reason. So, but I somewhat view myself as something like a litmus test for how good someone is at this corner of the internet. Or at least for the Christians. For the non-Christians, I'm no problem, right? But for the Christians, I am something of a litmus test of, can you talk to a heretic? And that's very different than Cooper talking to Vervaeke, right? Or something like that. Both because Vervaeke is much higher status than me, but I think that's one of my roles. And Jacob the Jew plays a similar sort of role of testing of someone. If you can handle interacting with him, that's generally a good test that you can fit in.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about this corner of the internet, I often think about your position in being in what has been sometimes very difficult position to operate within churches and participation. I mean, how has that been different for you in the participation of having this space where it feels like more people are willing to talk and engage with you on those things?
Yeah, I mean, I've said this to Paul before, that if the church that I went to let me be a full member, let me teach Sunday school once in a while, there's some elder teaching, the new member class, the catechesis, Protestants don't call it that, but that's what it is, the catechesis class for new members, right? Although what's interesting is that Protestants will baptize you and then catechize you and then let you become a member, right? Whereas for Catholics and Orthodox, it's the other way around. Baptism is the prize at the end of the path, not the step at the beginning of the path. But the Protestants are like, look, we got to make sure that you're saved in the meantime. Because if you're not baptized at the beginning of this process, if you got in a car crash on the way to our member class, heaven forbid, so we baptize you, then we catechize you. But anyway, so... but for if I had a church that was allowed me to be as fully engaged as those sorts of things as I wish that I could be, I probably wouldn't be around this corner of the internet very much, if at all. Right. And that I would be content pouring more of my energy that I put into podcasting and arguing with people on Discord or whatever. I would probably find a way to channel that into my local church. And that would probably be better for most everybody in the long run. I don't know. But it's precisely because I can't fit in anywhere except here that I'm here.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And like something I've been struggling with lately too, where I create online and mostly to help myself process through things. I think when I'm creating it helps me cut the consumption patterns a little bit better. Yet there is this part of me that recognizes how important it is to find that place within your community and grow there and let that be the thing that shapes me the most. And so but there's also that space where being part of this community online that's separated from everything in this odd way helped me learn that more than if I had never done it at all. And so how do you continue to not ignore what's happening on the internet and the process that can be helpful with it while not letting it be so ingrained in your life that it becomes everything?
Yeah.
That's a difficult question. And I mean,
Because it can alienate you from the people in your real life if you're too online.
oh yeah. Well, and I think it kind of makes you disoriented to what it is to be in real life.
Yeah.
Because it kind of warps and shifts what it is, like the way that we act, and there's always something to try to shift your attention. We lose sight of what it is to be bored and to to sit and be, and how to tolerate things that might not be the most easy
Right.
thing to a community, but by participating and embracing and learning how to manage those things can bring a lot of good. Yeah, it's interesting. I think though, the more that I've kind of gotten confidence in the religious tradition I am, and participating in that and seeing the good that's coming from that, has helped a lot. But yeah, then it's really difficult with someone like you, where you can't feel that full embrace of that. Like that has to be limiting.
Yeah. And so one thing that I'm trying to do to try and like take some of the lessons and growth that I've had from this little corner and embody it in real life and community is I'm running for the school board of my local school district. And there are 4 people running for 4 spots. So I feel pretty good about my chances. But the election's in April. So it's in Cook County, Illinois. So if you want to vote for me, the rules are pretty loose. That's a joke. A joke about Chicago having loose voting rules. Anyway, but I think that'll be interesting because school boards are becoming a contentious place, right? We've all seen those videos of parents yelling at school boards and vice versa about masks or transgender books in the library or what have you. And so like part of me is like, that might be kind of a good fit because I'm good at talking about contentious topics peacefully. And my girls, I've got 3 girls, are just starting to be of the age where they're starting public school next year. My oldest is, and then the younger ones in the years after that. So, but school board's a real responsibility. You have to like negotiate union contracts and do actual real things. And there's 6 other school board members, and then the thousands of community members of the school district. And so I think that'll be interesting. I'm hoping for that to kind of be a bridge between online Sam and real life Sam, but that'll be an interesting challenge.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that
Hello.
hi, Michael.
Hi.
Do you think that participation within the school system will fulfill that thing you feel like you're missing in church, or will it just kind of help placate it some?
Well, maybe a little bit, but it's also a little bit different, right? You can be involved and give back to your church and be involved and give back to your community, and those aren't mutually exclusive things. But it's also probably a little bit of that. Like, I can't get excommunicated from my community, that's I own a house here, so good luck with that. But so that it's a possible channel for some of this energy, I guess, is right though. What's up, Michael?
Oh, just enjoying all the discussion. This was an interesting thing. I picked up a book yesterday. I went to the Goodwill looking for books, and I found some old book. It was a Calvinist book, but I just never heard of the guy, so I looked it up. I'm like, is this like a crazy person book or something? and it was interesting because this guy apparently, like, he had no influence. His name was Arthur Pink, and he had like no influence in his whole life, and he kept getting kicked out of churches because apparently, like, the early half of the 20th century was just like a super unpopular time for Calvinist theology. Everybody was like, Arminian or whatever. And so he was pastor at like a bunch of churches for like less than a year. And then basically was like, I'm always going to be an outsider. And the only ministry I'm supposed to have is like writing or whatever. Which, I mean, I don't know, it's kind of sad, but but he was able to kind of work through that. But I mean, I guess this isn't much comfort, but posthumously, his book was super influential to a bunch of like 20th century preachers and theologians and stuff, or all of his books. So maybe that's.
So you're saying I need to run in my closet and write a really big long book?
No, I don't know. I'm just saying maybe your podcast will become like discovered later on, and it will be the center of a movement. I don't know.
That's funny. So Cassie, what are your goals for your podcast going forward? I listened to your couple of videos from the last week or two, and you talked about that a little bit. What's the focus of your podcast?
Well, my podcast itself, I think, is going to shift more to just conversations and really talking about ideas that, I think are interesting, and with people who I have good relationships with, and trying to explore ideas with them well. And it's really in the sense of more exploration and in how to process the things, we consume versus, trying to prove something or give solid answers. For the channel as a whole, that's a hard question to answer. I think I do want to bring more of like the creative side and the beauty ethic side of what I've been learning and like how it's been shaping me, which in some ways is slightly different than what I do with the podcast. But I think it's gone to the place where I just need to let myself be open to like go through this transition that I'm going through as I really get grounded in a new country, in a new place, and let that slowly shift. So it's hard for me to know what is the end goal. Well, the end goal is to process with myself and hopefully create something helpful about that, so I don't end up in this weird consumption cycle that is unhealthy. Will always being putting stuff out YouTube and processing it that way be healthy? I don't know, probably not. But I want to keep doing it as long as I do think it's healthy, and as long as it's growing me and shaping me. But I think it's just been the last 2 years have been definitely kind of transformative in me, where the way I approach the questions are even different. Where I used to come from a truth first approach, and now I'm moving more towards beauty first. And in a lot of ways, the actions are similar, but it just has a different approach and consequence in that. And like, I'm still not fully settled from making that switch and approaching those things in a different way. Does that make any sense?
That makes sense. So who are some of the people you want to talk to?
Well, I mean, there's still a lot of people. I really do want to talk to more people that I know in real life and in person. So people that I can talk with one-on-one. But I also want to talk with people who've created things I find interesting, and kind of understand the process of those things and the way that it shapes the way that we consume. Because even if it's like a television show or a piece of music, it's still a piece of information that's going into your brain, and you're consuming it, and it's changing the way that you process and function. And often, like, the narratives that are embedded in those have a far deeper impact in the way you're processing things than maybe the philosophies or the theologies underneath them, just because they're kind of wrapped in this sense of beauty, whether like audibly or visually, that make it more palatable to digest and form.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got some people, but I don't know. I just like talking to people and understanding that the ways and the shapes of where they come from gives us a fuller sense of what it is to be human and how to process these things. But that, like, there's definitely going to be still some of the people who like the intellectual side, but I'd like to talk to more artists and creative people and understand their art form and how it influences the whole picture.
I should leave in a minute or two, just FYI. But
Yeah, well, and I'll probably close here soonish. Just kind of my experiment with this. But thank you for coming and talking to me.
no, it was perfect timing. I was thinking about doing this. I was like, I could start up Jacob's channel, and then I opened YouTube, and you were on. I was like, oh, perfect, even better.
Yeah, I don't know how long. I'm gonna try it for a couple weeks, see how I like it. But
Yeah,
as I said, there's a lot about it that makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
there's not a lot of control in the process of it. It's the Wild West in
it
so
is the
many
Wild
ways.
West. Yeah. Well, you can always just let people blast rap music on your channel. So
It's a certain part of art and participation that maybe some
Yeah.
people will like.
yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I should check out. But anyway, nice talking with you, Cassidy.
All right, bye, Sam.
Thanks for
Thank
letting
you.
me on.
Yes, no problem. Well, with that, I'm probably going to end the stream. Thanks for listening in. And I'll probably do this again next week, next Friday, probably around the same time. And so, if you'd like to join and you have something to add that's not just rap music, I'm happy to try and let you on and have a conversation. All right. Bye, guys. Thanks.